I was sitting at my kitchen table with a tin of black shoe polish and a frayed cotton rag. The heavy smell of wax and leather filled the room, mixing with the faint scent of motor oil that never really leaves a man like me. It was a Friday night in my quiet house down in South Fulton, Atlanta. The mortgage has been paid off for a decade. The halls are silent and empty ever since my beautiful wife, Brenda, passed away 5 years ago. On the back of the kitchen chair hung my charcoal suit. It was 10 years old, but I had it dry cleaned specifically for tomorrow. My only son, Andre, was getting married. I'm 62 years old and my name is Marcus Vance. I rubbed the cloth in tight, slow circles over the toe of my dress boot. I wanted to look sharp. I wanted to look respectable. I am a retired logistics and trucking fleet owner. I spent 40 years of my life with cracked knuckles and an aching back rotating tires and managing diesel rigs just so my son would never have to touch a wrench. I wanted him to have the soft hands of a man who signs the checks, not the rough hands of a man who waits for them. And I succeeded. Andre is 27. He wears tailored suits that cost more than my first delivery van. He drives a pristine BMW that I pay the note on, even though he tells his buckhead friends he bought it with his corporate bonus. I looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was 7 in the evening. I was expecting a call, maybe a little excitement or maybe a simple thank you. I had transferred $85,000 to the wedding venue, the Grand Estate, just 48 hours ago. It was the deposit and the final payment wrapped all in one. Kendra, my future daughter-in-law, had insisted on the Grand Estate. She told Andre it was the only property in Atlanta that met her family standards. My phone buzzed heavily on the table. The sudden vibration rattled against the solid oak wood. I wiped my hands on a paper towel and picked it up. A warm smile touched my face. It was a text message from Andre. I reached into my shirt pocket and put on my reading glasses. I read the message. Then I read it again. Then I took my glasses off, cleaned the lenses on my shirt, put them back on, and read it a third time. Dad, I am so sorry, but Kendra is really stressed out tonight. She says having you there tomorrow will make her too anxious. Her family is very high society from Buckhead, and well, you are a bit too working class for them. They are uncomfortable around people who look like they labor for a living. It is better if you do not come to the wedding. I will send you plenty of photos. Love, Andre. I stared at the glowing phone screen until it went completely black. The silence in the kitchen was sudden and absolute. It felt like all the oxygen had been sucked right out of the room. Too working class. The words bounced around inside my head, loud and cruel. I looked down at my hands. They are thick and calloused. I have a jagged scar on my left thumb from a busted engine block back in '98. I have a permanent dark tan on my neck from working under the scorching Georgia sun. These hands built the foundation of the very life Andre enjoyed. These hands changed his diapers when Brenda was sick and weak. These hands signed the heavy checks for his expensive private school and his out-of-state college tuition. And these exact hands signed the wire transfer for $85,000 just yesterday morning. I did not feel anger at first. I felt a cold, heavy stone drop straight to the bottom of my stomach. It was the sickening feeling of a man who realizes he has been building a massive house on a sinkhole for 27 years. Andre did not even have the basic courage to call me. He sent a text. He dismissed his own father, the man who had been his only living parent for the last 5 years, with a few cowardly words on a screen. Kendra. I thought of her immediately. She is 25. She acts like a royal princess holding court in a kingdom she did not build. She told Andre she comes from old money. She speaks with a fake, elevated tone and treats waitstaff like absolute garbage. And Andre just follows her around like a blind, obedient puppy. He is weak. I raised him to be kind and respectful, but somewhere along the way, kindness turned into sheer weakness. I stood up from the table. My bad knee popped loudly in the quiet room. I walked over to the refrigerator and took out a cold beer, but then I put it right back. This moment required something much stronger. I walked to the high cabinet and poured 3 fingers of dark bourbon into a thick glass. I drank it down in one solid swallow. The fiery burn woke me up. I looked over at the charcoal suit hanging quietly on the kitchen chair. It looked like a foolish costume now. A cheap costume for an old clown who thought he was actually part of the family. I walked slowly over to it. I slid the wooden hanger off the chair. I walked down the hall to the hall closet and shoved it all the way in the very back behind my heavy winter coats. I would not be needing a formal suit tomorrow. I walked back into the kitchen and sat heavily at the table. I picked up my phone again. I hovered my thick thumb right over the call button. I wanted to scream into the receiver. I wanted to demand how he could do this to his own flesh and blood. But then I stopped myself. What was the actual point? If I had to beg my only son to want me present at his own wedding, then I had already lost the war. Dignity is the only real thing a man has left when he is sitting alone. I would not give them the sick satisfaction of hearing my voice crack. I would not give them the twisted joy of hearing me yell. I walked over to the heavy oak desk, tucked in the corner of my quiet living room. I pulled out the wooden chair and sat down. I opened my silver laptop. The bright screen glowed a harsh blue, illuminating the dark shadows of the room. I typed in my long password and logged directly into my private bank account. Most people in this city look at me and they just see a tired old man. They see a quiet guy in a faded flannel shirt, driving an old Ford F-150 with a visible dent in the rear bumper. They see a man who cuts his own grass and changes his own motor oil on a hot Saturday afternoon. They see a man who clips paper coupons just to save a single dollar on dark roast coffee. They do not know who I truly am. They do not know that 30 years ago I started a massive commercial trucking company with one single used delivery van. They do not know that I bought acres of ugly industrial land when it was dirt cheap and I sold it to corporate developers when the Atlanta market completely exploded. They do not know that I quietly own 3 luxury apartment complexes right in the wealthy heart of the city. I fully retired 5 years ago, but my money certainly did not. Andre thinks I live on a basic union pension and small Social Security checks. He thinks the platinum credit card I gave him has a strict $5,000 limit and that I struggle every single month to pay the minimum balance. He thinks the $85,000 for this lavish wedding was my entire life savings. He thinks he is draining me completely dry and that I'm just too old and stupid to notice because I love him so much. He is dead wrong. I moved the mouse and clicked on the transaction history tab. I wanted to see exactly what my working class money had bought his high society family this week. The list on the screen was incredibly long. It was absolutely disgusting. $4,000 at a luxury spa right in the middle of Buckhead. That charge was from 2 days ago. Kendra and her mother Patrice must have booked the absolute highest platinum package. I have not spent $4,000 on myself in the last 4 years combined. I scrolled down the bright page. $12,000 to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. A massive charge for a private VIP penthouse suite booked for an entire week for Kendra and her arrogant parents. Andre told me her parents, Desmond and Patrice, were incredibly wealthy real estate investors. If they are so incredibly wealthy, why am I paying for their luxury hotel rooms? Why am I paying for them to sleep in absolute comfort while they look down their elevated noses at me? I scrolled down again. $3,000 at a high-end steakhouse downtown. That huge charge was from last night for the official rehearsal dinner. I was not invited to the rehearsal dinner either. Andre specifically told me it was a private, intimate event strictly for the bridal party. But looking closely at the itemized bill, I see massive food charges for 20 different people. 20 people eating prime rib and fresh lobster, drinking imported French wine on my personal dime while I ate a cold turkey sandwich sitting entirely alone in my dark kitchen. I kept scrolling down the page. $500 for a premium black car limousine service. The pickup was clearly scheduled for tomorrow morning right at the hotel lobby. That must be for Desmond and Patrice, the wealthy Buckhead parents who apparently cannot afford their own luxury ride to their own daughter's wedding. And then I saw the really big one. It was sitting right at the very top of the screen, clearly marked as pending. $85,000. The Grand Estate venue. I stared hard at that massive number. That was an entire college education. That was a solid cash down payment on a beautiful brick house in a very good neighborhood. That money was the literal blood and the heavy sweat of my entire adult life. And they were casually using it to throw a lavish fake party where my own presence was completely banned. I looked at the exact date of the transaction. I'd initiated the wire transfer yesterday morning. It was a standard electronic bank transfer. Most people think these large transfers are instant. They are certainly not. They take a specific amount of time to fully clear the Federal Reserve. There is a small critical window, a tiny gap in time where the original sender can legally revoke the authorization if there is a severe error or a clear case of criminal fraud. And this was absolute fraud. It was a vicious, calculated fraud of the heart. My own son was a complete parasite. He was a smooth liar who wore expensive tailored suits to hide his empty soul. I felt the last lingering drop of fatherly pity evaporate completely from my chest. I moved the mouse cursor across the bright screen. My right hand was perfectly steady. I was a quiet sniper taking careful aim at my ultimate target. I clicked heavily on the $85,000 transaction. A small drop-down menu popped up right on the screen. I selected the option to formally dispute the transaction. The banking website asked for a specific reason. I typed in one single word, unauthorized. It was not a lie. I had authorized payment for my own son's wedding. I did not authorize payment for an elite social event where my presence was strictly banned. The unspoken contract between a father and his son had been violently breached. I clicked the submit button. The screen quickly refreshed. Transaction canceled. The massive sum of money would not leave my secure account. The management at the Grand Estate would get an automated notification in the morning that the digital funds had completely failed. I was not entirely done. I moved my mouse straight over to the credit card tab. This was the heavy platinum card that Andre carried proudly in his expensive leather wallet. The card he used every day to impress Kendra and her fake high society friends. The card he used blindly to buy her shallow love. I looked closely at the current statement balance. He had racked up $20,000 in the last 30 days alone. Designer flowers, tailored suits, expensive jewelry. I clicked on the tab to manage authorized users. I clearly saw his name, Andre Vance. There was a small green toggle switch right next to his name that said active. I clicked it once. The digital status instantly changed to inactive. But I wanted to be absolutely sure. I wanted to be perfectly certain that when he tried to swipe that shiny card tomorrow to pay for the makeup artist or the final open bar tab, that it would be nothing more than a useless brick of plastic. I clicked the button to report the card lost or stolen. The site asked if I wanted to order a fast replacement card. I clicked no. I leaned back slowly in my heavy desk chair. The living room was perfectly silent. But deep inside my own head, I could clearly hear the sharp sound of a steel guillotine dropping. I quickly closed the browser tab for the National Bank. Then I opened my personal email application. I had an unread email sitting there from the property management company for the luxury townhouse up in Buckhead. This is the expensive house where Andre and Kendra currently live. They truly think they simply rent it from a faceless corporate property management group. They do not know that I own the actual deed to the house. I bought it through a private holding company 3 years ago just so they would have a safe, beautiful place to live. I have been quietly subsidizing their monthly rent. They pay exactly $1,000 a month. The actual market rate for that neighborhood is closer to $4,000. I quietly pay the massive difference from one pocket right into the other just to keep the accounting books perfectly balanced. I started writing an email to the lead property manager. His name is Isaiah. He's also my longtime corporate lawyer and my oldest personal friend. Subject line: immediate eviction notice. Isaiah, please prepare a formal 30-day notice to vacate for the current tenants living in the Buckhead townhouse. Also, I am raising the monthly rent to the maximum market value effective immediately for any possible lease renewal. Absolutely no exceptions. Please send the official notice first thing tomorrow morning. Marcus. I clicked the send button. It was officially done. In the short span of 10 quiet minutes, I had completely dismantled the fake financial fantasy that my ungrateful son lived in. I closed the silver laptop. I sat there in the dark, and I felt a very strange sensation. I honestly thought I would feel terribly guilty. A good father should always protect his only child. But a good father should also teach his child how to survive the real world. And I had clearly failed to teach Andre basic gratitude. I had failed completely to teach him genuine respect. So now real life would have to teach him the lesson, and real life is an incredibly cruel teacher. I stood up from the desk and walked slowly back to the kitchen. I washed my empty bourbon glass in the sink and placed it carefully in the drying rack. I put the black shoe polish away deep under the bottom cabinet. My cell phone started to vibrate again, buzzing angrily against the table. I walked over and looked down at it. It was Andre calling me. He must have been at a loud bar or an expensive downtown club celebrating his last grand night of freedom. Or maybe his platinum card had just been publicly declined for an expensive round of premium drinks. The bright screen lit up with a clear picture of his face. It was an old picture of us from a deep-sea fishing trip down in Florida about 5 years ago. He was smiling wide. I was smiling wide. We looked exactly like a real team. I watched the expensive phone vibrate against the hard wood. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It finally stopped. Then a short text message quickly came in. Dad, please call me back right now. My credit card is not working at all. I stared coldly at the demanding text. He did not ask if I was doing okay. He did not offer a single apology for the cruel earlier text banning me from his own wedding. He only contacted me because his golden access to my hard-earned money was suddenly cut off. That was absolutely all I needed to see. I pressed my heavy thumb hard on the power button on the side of the phone. I held it down tight until the bright screen went totally black and the little spinning loading wheel completely disappeared. I turned off the bright kitchen light. I walked slowly down the long, quiet hallway, heading straight toward my master bedroom. I passed the old framed photos hanging on the wall. Photos of my beautiful Brenda. Photos of Andre proudly graduating from college. Photos of the simple, happy life I honestly thought I had. I walked into my bedroom and lay down flat on my large bed. The clean sheets were nice and cool. I pulled the heavy blanket all the way up to my chin. Tomorrow was going to be a very bad day for Andre Vance. Tomorrow morning he was going to wake up and put on a tailored tuxedo that he probably had not even fully paid for yet. He was going to rush over to a luxury venue that was actively expecting an $85,000 check that was simply never coming. He was going to proudly stand there right in front of his fake high society and laws with a frozen credit card and a massive lie that was absolutely about to explode right in his arrogant face, and I would certainly not be there to quietly fix it for him. I closed my tired eyes. For the first time in 27 long years, I did not worry about my son. I did not worry about his future at all. I had done absolutely everything I possibly could. I drifted off to a deep sleep, listening closely to the quiet sound of the wind outside. It sounded exactly like a heavy storm was coming, and it certainly was. But for the very first time, the storm was not hitting my quiet house. It was heading straight for his. The bright morning sun was just beginning to burn off the heavy mist that clung tightly to the manicured lawns of my quiet neighborhood. It was exactly 7 in the morning on the very day my only son was supposed to get married. Most proud fathers would be carefully tying a silk Windsor knot, or nervously checking their expensive watch, or maybe nursing a hot cup of dark coffee while thinking deeply about the toast they were going to give. I was out in my wide front yard pulling the heavy starter cord on my 20-year-old Toro lawnmower. The old engine sputtered twice and then roared to loud life, a deep, mechanical growl that completely shattered the peaceful suburban silence. I honestly loved that loud sound. It was the honest sound of hard work. It was the steady sound of true reliability. That heavy metal machine had never let me down completely, unlike the ungrateful people who were absolutely about to show up. I adjusted my faded baseball cap, pulling the curved brim low over my tired eyes, and started pushing the heavy mower across the thick green grass. I could clearly smell the sharp gasoline and the sweet, fresh scent of cut clover. It was incredibly grounding. It reminded me exactly of who I was. I was Marcus Vance. I built strong things. I fixed broken things. And today, I was going to systematically tear something completely down. I was exactly halfway through the second long row when I heard the sudden, violent screech. It was the highly distinct sound of expensive performance rubber being brutally tortured against hard asphalt. I did not look up immediately. I kept my steady pace, pushing the loud mower, feeling the deep vibration in my calloused hands. But I knew that specific sound. I knew the high-pitched engine note that quickly followed it. It was a pristine black BMW M5A machine of sheer precision engineering that cost well north of $100,000. I knew exactly how much it cost because I was the exact man who wrote the heavy check for it just 2 years ago when Andre explicitly told me he desperately needed a highly reliable car for important client meetings down in Buckhead. The sleek black sedan drifted around the quiet corner, way too incredibly fast for a residential family street, and slammed hard on the ceramic brakes right in front of my concrete driveway. The wide tires smoked heavily, leaving thick black skid marks right on the clean pavement I had manually sealed myself just last summer. I stopped pushing the heavy mower. I did not turn it off. I just let it loudly idle the strong engine, chugging rhythmically, while I leaned heavily against the metal handle and simply waited. The heavy driver's door flew violently open. Andre scrambled out in a sheer panic. He looked like an absolute wreck. His short hair was completely unwashed, sticking up in messy tufts, and he was wearing a deeply wrinkled white t-shirt and loose gray sweatpants. He looked absolutely nothing like a sophisticated man who was about to marry into high society. He looked exactly like a lost, terrified boy who had just lost his mother at the crowded grocery store. Then the passenger door flew open. Kendra stepped aggressively out. She was wearing a bright pink velour designer tracksuit that probably cost significantly more than my reliable lawnmower and huge dark sunglasses that covered half her angry face. She slammed the heavy car door so incredibly hard the entire suspension rocked violently. That disrespectful sound made my jaw tighten. You do not slam the heavy door of an expensive car you do not actually own. Marcus, she screamed at the top of her lungs. Her shrill voice was piercing, cutting cleanly right through the deep rumble of the lawnmower. "What the absolute hell is wrong with you?" I reached slowly down and flipped the red switch on the mower. The loud engine instantly died. The sudden heavy silence in the yard was incredibly thick. I took a very slow, deep breath, inhaling the strong gasoline fumes one last time before finally facing them. I grabbed a frayed cotton rag from my back pocket and slowly wiped the heavy sweat from my dark forehead. I did not say a single word. I just looked at them with cold, dead eyes. Andre ran frantically up the steep driveway, his expensive leather loafers slipping slightly on the loose, wet grass clippings. "Dad," he panted heavily, stopping just a few short feet away from me. "Dad, you absolutely have to pick up the phone. Why is your cell phone completely turned off? Do you have any earthly idea what is happening right now?" I looked at him with absolute chilling calm. "I'm cutting my front grass, Andre," I said quietly. "I strongly prefer to focus when I do manual physical work." Kendra marched furiously up right behind him. She did not even bother to look at me. She stared down at her expensive phone, typing violently with her long manicured nails before aggressively shoving the bright screen directly toward my face. "Declined," she hissed with pure venom. "Declined. Do you know what that specific word actually means, Marcus?" I was sitting at the luxury salon. I was physically in the styling chair. They had literally just finished placing the expensive hair extensions. My real hair was still completely wet. And when I handed them your platinum card, the credit machine beeped loudly. It beeped incredibly loud. Every single person in the high-end salon stopped and looked directly at me. The lead stylist, the other wealthy customers, absolutely everyone. She took a threatening step closer, rudely invading my personal space. She smelled heavily of expensive chemical hair products and absolute raw desperation. The digital screen literally said "stolen." She whispered the harsh word like it was a vile curse. The credit machine explicitly said the physical card was formally reported stolen. They honestly thought I was a common thief. They directly threatened to call the Atlanta police, Marcus. I actually had to call my own wealthy father to angrily pay the massive bill over the phone. My own father. On the early morning of my actual wedding day, I folded the frayed cotton rag very neatly and shoved it deep back into my denim pocket. "That sounds incredibly embarrassing," I said smoothly. My deep voice was completely flat, entirely devoid of any human sympathy. "Embarrassing," she shrieked loudly in my front yard. "It was absolutely humiliating, Marcus. You need to call the bank right this exact second. Tell them it was a stupid mistake. Tell them you are an old idiot who pressed the entirely wrong button. Fix this massive problem right now." Andre stepped quickly right between us, putting his shaking hands up in a weak, placating gesture. "Dad, please," he begged softly. "We simply do not have the time for this argument right now. The luxury florist is literally waiting for the massive final payment. The black car limousine company desperately needs the huge deposit for the prompt airport pickup. We have so incredibly many high-end vendors to pay this busy morning. Just quickly unlock the platinum card. We can peacefully talk about whatever is bothering you later, long after the beautiful wedding, whatever is actually bothering me." The incredibly foolish phrase hung heavily in the thick morning air. He honestly thought this was just a grumpy mood. He seriously thought this was just a fading senior moment. He did not even actively realize that the solid ground had completely shifted right beneath his expensive leather loafers. I looked very closely at my only son. I looked directly at the pure rising panic in his wide, terrified eyes. It was certainly not the deep panic of a loving man worried deeply about his aging father. It was the desperate, frantic panic of a hopeless addict suddenly cut off entirely from his free supply. "I'm certainly not calling the bank," I said calmly. Andre blinked his eyes rapidly in utter confusion. What he asked weakly, I specifically said, I am not calling the National Bank, I repeated with absolute chilling clarity. The platinum card was not declined by some random digital mistake, Andre. I formally reported it stolen myself. Kendra let out a strange, sharp sound that was exactly half dark laugh and half angry animal growl. You did what she demanded viciously. Why on earth would you ever do that? Because I suddenly realized something very important last night. I said slowly, crossing my thick, muscular arms right over my broad chest. I realized that only a common thief would willingly take $85,000 from a hardworking man, and then text him to say he simply is not good enough to quietly eat at the exact same table. Andre went completely pale. The last drop of color drained directly from his soft face. He finally slowly understood. This was not a banking glitch. This was a direct, calculated response. Dad, come on, he stammered nervously, his weak voice dropping down to a terrified whisper. You got the unfortunate text message. Look, I'm honestly so incredibly sorry, okay? It is just extremely complicated. Kendra has a very different family. They have massive expectations. We just really wanted the beautiful day to be perfectly flawless. We simply did not want you to feel totally out of place. Out of place? I repeated the absurd words. You are standing right now in the very driveway of the brick house I built with my bare hands. You are driving the expensive luxury car I bought with my hard cash. You are wearing expensive tailored clothes I paid for in full. And you honestly think I'm the one who is totally out of place? Kendra scoffed loudly, rolling her dark eyes violently behind her huge designer glasses. Oh, here we go again, she spat angrily, the tired old martyr act. Listen closely to me, Marcus. We simply do not have the time for your little blue-collar pity party. We have elite wealthy guests arriving from Buckhead. We have a very tight production schedule. You are actively ruining absolutely everything just because your fragile old ego got slightly bruised. Just give us the damn money and go right back to your dirty yard gardening. She took another aggressive step toward me. You are absolutely right, she hissed cruelly. You do not fit in at all with my sophisticated family. Look closely at yourself. You are literally covered in wet grass clippings. You look exactly like the hired help. The hired help. I looked slowly down at my heavy steel toe boots. They were old, trusted work boots, deeply stained with dark motor oil and dry, cracked mud. I looked at my faded flannel shirt. It was worn incredibly thin at the heavy elbows. Then I looked right past them directly at the sleek, black BMW, sitting idly out in the residential street. That specific car was my absolute pride and joy when I bought it. I'd worked an extra 6 months of grueling logistics consulting jobs just to pay cold, hard cash for it so Andre would never, ever have a heavy car payment hanging over his young head. I legally put the formal title entirely in my own name, strictly for liability insurance purposes, but I let him proudly drive it exactly as if it were his own vehicle. I let him pretend to the whole world that he was the big, wealthy shot. You know, Kendra, I said quietly, my deep voice dropping an entire heavy octave. You are absolutely right. I am just the working help. I am the quiet help that constantly pays for your luxury apartment. I am the tired help that fully funds your expensive tropical vacations. And I am the foolish help that pays the monthly insurance for that exact car you just violently slammed the heavy door of. I walked deliberately past them, marching steadily down the steep concrete driveway, heading straight toward the quiet street. Where are you going? Andre asked nervously, his cracking voice rapidly rising in sheer pitch. Dad. Where exactly are you going right now? I walked directly up to the pristine black BMW. I ran my rough, calloused hand slowly along the smooth, hot hood. The sleek, dark metal was still radiating heat from the powerful German engine. I looked down closely at the wide tires. Michelin Pilot Sports exactly $500 a corner. I paid for those expensive tires too. I reached deep into my worn denim pocket and pulled out my heavy brass keyring. I kept a programmed spare digital key for absolutely every single vehicle I legally owned. I pressed the small unlock button. The bright amber lights flashed twice. I pulled open the heavy driver's door. "Dad, what are you doing?" Andre yelled frantically, running desperately toward me. "We absolutely need that car. We have to promptly pick up the important groomsmen in less than 1 single hour." I sat heavily in the soft driver's seat. The premium imported leather was incredibly smooth. It smelled strongly of Andre and his expensive cologne, and Kendra and her sweet floral perfume. It smelled exactly like absolute unearned entitlement. I pushed the shiny start button. The powerful engine roared loudly to life. The digital dashboard lit up, glowing bright crimson. "Get out of the car!" Marcus Kendra screamed at the top of her lungs, running awkwardly down the steep driveway, her designer heels clicking frantically on the hard concrete. "That is our expensive car. You absolutely cannot take our car." I rolled down the tinted window right as they physically reached me. I looked up at Andre. He was gripping the door handle tightly, his knuckles entirely white from the severe strain. "It is certainly not your car, Andre," I said with a terrifying calmness. "It never actually was. It is my car. My legal name is on the formal state title. My specific name is on the heavy insurance policy. And since I am currently not invited to the exclusive wedding, I simply do not see why my beautiful car should be invited either. Dad, you absolutely cannot do this." Andre pleaded desperately, actual tears welling up in his wide, terrified eyes. "How are we supposed to get to the massive venue? How are we supposed to even get around the busy city?" "I really do not know," I said coldly, shifting the smooth car firmly into drive. "Maybe you can quickly call Kendra and her supposedly wealthy father. I'm completely sure he has a spare luxury limousine just lying around his massive estate. Or maybe you can just take the public city bus. It is very affordable and very working class." I did not wait for his pathetic response. I stepped hard on the heavy gas pedal. The powerful car surged violently forward, leaving them standing utterly, completely stranded in the middle of the quiet suburban street. I looked briefly in the clear rearview mirror. I saw my son Andre standing entirely frozen with his arms hanging uselessly by his sides, looking completely lost. I saw Kendra throwing her manicured hands violently in the air, screaming raw profanities at the completely empty space where the luxury car used to be. I drove the fast BMW quickly around the residential block and parked it safely inside my closed garage. I pushed the button to close the heavy metal garage door. Then I walked calmly back inside my quiet house and locked the solid front door. I went straight to the kitchen and poured myself a hot cup of black coffee. My large hands were shaking very slightly, certainly not from any fear, but from raw pumping adrenaline. I had clearly fired the very first heavy shot, but the massive war was incredibly far from over. I sat down heavily at the solid oak kitchen table and looked down at my expensive cell phone. It was buzzing angrily again, vibrating hard against the polished wood. This time it was not Andre calling. It was the old landline ringing loudly in the front hallway. I simply let it ring. I knew exactly what was coming next. They would try to scramble back to their luxury Buckhead apartment. They would frantically try to regroup and find absolutely anything they could possibly sell just to get some quick emergency cash. They were heading straight back to the expensive townhouse, and they had absolutely no idea that the heavy brass locks on that specific property were actively being changed by Isaiah and his professional crew in exactly 20 short minutes. I took a slow, deep sip of my dark coffee. It was incredibly bitter, exactly the way I truly like it. This was certainly going to be a very long Saturday, but for the very first time in years, I was actively looking forward to it. They desperately wanted a massive show. They wanted a perfect high society wedding. Well, I was officially going to give them a spectacular show that they would absolutely never forget. I was going to systematically show them exactly what happens when the tired working help finally decides to completely quit. The noisy landline finally stopped ringing. The heavy silence returned to my warm kitchen. But it was certainly not peaceful. It was the sharp, crackling silence of a short fuse burning rapidly down, and the coming explosion was going to be absolutely spectacular. I reached deep into my worn denim pocket and pulled out my cell phone again. I scrolled quickly through my short list of private contacts. I did not have very many, but the specific ones I kept were incredibly useful. I quickly found the direct private number for elite Atlanta chauffeurs. I knew the actual owner very well. His name was Calvin. We had played heavy stakes poker together every single month for the last 20 solid years. I put the bright phone on speaker and set it flat on the wooden table. The secure line rang exactly twice. Marcus Calvin boomed loudly, his deep baritone voice filling my quiet kitchen. "It is incredibly good to hear from you, my brother. Is absolutely everything good to go for the massive VIP airport pickup this busy morning?" "Hello, Calvin," I said smoothly, staring straight at the dark wood grain of my table. "I'm calling you directly about the massive reservation for the Vance and Davenport wedding, the stretch luxury SUV, and the 2 premium black town cars specifically booked for the VIP airport arrival." "Yes, sir," Calvin said proudly. "My absolute best professional drivers are physically parked at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport right this exact second. The early morning direct flight from New York just landed safely. We are currently waiting for the entire Davenport party right down at the VIP luxury baggage claim." I smiled a very cold, dark smile. Her arrogant parents, her supposedly incredibly wealthy and sophisticated parents, were walking blindly toward the busy baggage claim right now, completely expecting a uniformed chauffeur holding a crisp white sign with their fancy name on it. "Calvin," I said quietly, "there has been a very sudden change of formal plans." "What kind of rapid change?" Marcus Calvin asked, his professional tone shifting to slight confusion. "I actively need you to completely cancel the entire transportation service," I said firmly. "Cancel it right now?" Calvin asked in utter shock. "Marcus, my good friend, the professional drivers are already physically there. The expensive running meters are actively ticking up, I know they are." "Calvin," I said calmly, "I will personally pay the maximum cancellation fee. Whatever the heavy cost is, just put it directly on my personal account tab, but absolutely do not pick up those specific passengers." "Marcus, are you entirely sure about this?" Calvin asked cautiously. "It is your only son's actual wedding day." "I am perfectly sure, Calvin," I said without a single ounce of hesitation. The platinum credit card currently on file for all the expensive incidentals was my son's personal card, and it has been officially reported stolen to the Federal Reserve Bank, and I am formally withdrawing my own personal financial guarantee for the entire corporate contract. Send your professional drivers home immediately. There was a very long, heavy pause on the quiet line. Then Calvin sighed deeply. "All right, Marcus," he said softly. "You are the ultimate boss. I will radio the drivers right now and tell them to immediately leave the crowded terminal. I'm truly sorry about whatever family trouble is brewing today." "There's absolutely no trouble, Calvin," I said smoothly. "Thank you for your fast, reliable help." I reached out and hung up the phone. The heavy silence that followed in my kitchen was entirely different now. It was not the anxious silence of a burning fuse anymore. It was the deafening silence of a massive bomb that had just violently detonated. I pictured Desmond and Patrice Davenport clearly in my mind. I pictured Desmond, a man who constantly bragged loudly about his massive real estate portfolio, standing totally confused and angry on the busy curbside. I pictured Patrice, a woman who strictly wore imported Italian silk, dragging her own heavy designer luggage across the dirty concrete, frantically waving her manicured hands at passing yellow taxicabs. They constantly claimed they never ever took public transportation. They heavily insisted they only traveled in private luxury. Well, today, they were going to learn a very harsh lesson about strict logistics and actual cash flow. They were supposedly incredibly wealthy people, according to Kendra. I am completely sure they can easily figure out how to order a basic city cab. Or maybe they can just take the public MARTA train. It runs straight up to Buckhead. It is highly efficient and incredibly working class. I stood up slowly from my kitchen table. I had highly important work to do. I had a spectacular high society wedding to completely crash, and I desperately needed to make sure my old charcoal suit was perfectly pressed. Because if I was legally going to be the absolute villain in their fake high society story, I was going to be the absolute best-dressed villain they had ever seen. I grabbed my heavy truck keys directly off the kitchen counter. I walked out the front door and climbed high up into my old Ford F-150. The engine turned over with a deep, throaty rumble. I shifted into gear and drove slowly toward the busy highway. The drive up to Buckhead usually takes about 30 minutes on a quiet Saturday morning. I drove past the sprawling strip malls and the tall, new glass office buildings that had completely swallowed up the old dirt fields I used to play in as a young boy. I finally pulled my battered truck right onto the quiet, tree-lined street where the expensive luxury townhouse sat. I parked neatly across the street directly under a massive oak tree and killed the loud engine. The beautiful brick house looked incredibly good. I had personally rebuilt the entire front patio just 3 short years ago, choosing a highly expensive slate stone that would absolutely last forever. The manicured front lawn was perfectly green, and the tall glass windows were completely spotless. It was a flawless starter home, an incredible luxury property most young couples would literally kill for, and I'd quietly handed it to them for the monthly price of a cheap studio apartment. I saw them immediately before I even opened my heavy truck door. They were standing frantically on the wide front porch. Kendra was banging her manicured fists violently against the solid wood door, screaming at the heavy brass lock, exactly as if it could actually hear her shrill voice. Andre was pacing rapidly back and forth on the slate walkway. He had his soft hands buried deep in his messy hair, looking exactly like a desperate man who had just watched his entire life burn completely to the ground. They had absolutely not gone straight to the busy airport. They had not gone to a luxury hotel. They had rushed directly back here, blindly hoping I was just bluffing them. They honestly hoped that the shiny gold key in his expensive tailored pocket would still easily turn the heavy tumbler. It certainly did not. Isaiah is a brilliant corporate lawyer and an incredibly ruthless property manager. When Isaiah strictly says the locks completely change at 8 in the morning, he absolutely means 8 in the morning on the exact dot. I stepped slowly out of my heavy truck. I did not violently slam the metal door. I just pushed it gently shut until it quietly clicked. The sharp, metallic sound instantly made Andre look up from the sidewalk. When he finally saw me standing there, his entire face completely changed. The pure, raw fear I had clearly seen earlier was entirely gone rapidly, replaced by a dark, ugly, and violent fury. He did not see his loving father anymore. He only saw the bitter enemy. He saw the exact man standing directly between him and the fake luxury life he truly felt he was absolutely owed. He suddenly started running straight across the wide street toward me. He did not scream. He did not shout a single word. He just lowered his head and charged like a wild, angry animal. I had clearly seen that exact dark look before in ugly bar fights and in violent physical disagreements on dusty construction sites whenever the weekly money suddenly ran out. It was the dangerous look of a broken man who has completely lost control and desperately wants to hurt absolutely anything just to prove he still actually exists. I stood my solid ground. I did not flinch a single inch. I reached calmly into the deep bed of my rusty truck. My thick right hand closed tightly around the cold rubber grip of a massive pair of long-handled pruning shears. I had tossed them carelessly back there yesterday afternoon, after aggressively trimming the overgrown hedges at one of my other rental properties. They were incredibly heavy, forged from solid hardened steel, with thick curved blades sharp enough to take a grown man down without even slowing down. I pulled the heavy shears out and held them casually at my side. I did not raise them up like a dangerous weapon. I just held them firmly, exactly like a common garden tool that I knew perfectly well how to properly use. Andre crossed the dark asphalt. He did not slow down at all. He was actively preparing to hit me. My own flesh and blood was actively going to tackle me right onto the hard pavement. I took one single deliberate step forward and violently snapped the heavy steel blades of the shears together. Clack! The sharp metallic sound was incredibly loud, cutting cleanly through the quiet morning air, exactly like a loud gunshot. Andre skidded to a sudden violent halt, exactly 6 feet away from me. He stared completely wide-eyed at the heavy steel shears. Then he looked slowly up directly at my calm face. I was certainly not smiling. I was not even visibly angry. I was completely cold. I looked directly at him with the dead eyes of a veteran foreman who just caught a lazy worker stealing expensive copper wire. I looked at him with the strict eyes of a ruthless man who has quietly fired people significantly bigger and much meaner than him. "Do not do it," I said. My deep voice was incredibly low, barely even a whisper, but he heard it perfectly clear. "Do not take another single step, Andre." He stood frozen there, his chest heaving wildly, his soft hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. "You locked us out," he choked out, white saliva flying from his trembling lips. "Absolutely all of our important stuff is trapped inside there. My tailored reception suit, her expensive party dress, our physical passports, absolutely everything. You cannot legally do this to us. It is completely illegal. It is absolutely not illegal," I said calmly, keeping my dark eyes locked entirely on his face. "It is a standard commercial lockout for strict non-payment of market value rent and severe lease violation." Isaiah formally posted the legal notice directly on the front door. "Did you not bother to read it?" "I do not care about some stupid legal notice," he screamed loudly, taking one tiny half step forward. "Open the damn door right now, Dad. Open the heavy door, or I swear to God I will make you." He raised a shaking fist right in the air. I slowly lifted the heavy steel shears. I pointed the sharp, curved blades right at his heaving chest. My thick arm did not shake. It was entirely as steady as a solid rock. "You will do what, Andre?" I asked coldly. "You will physically hit me. You will aggressively beat up the tired old man. Go right ahead and try it. But please remember exactly who taught you how to throw a proper punch. And remember clearly that I spent 40 grueling years breaking solid concrete blocks while you were softly playing video games in the cold air conditioning." He completely froze. He looked down at the sharp steel blades and then deeply back into my cold eyes. He saw something dark there that he had absolutely never seen before. He finally saw that the warm safety net was entirely gone. He clearly saw that I was not his loving dad anymore. I was just another grown man standing right in his way. And in a violent physical fight between two grown men he knew perfectly well he would absolutely lose. The hot rage drained completely out of him, leaving him entirely hollow and weak. He took a slow, shaking step backward, dropping his soft hands. "You are completely crazy," he whispered in shock. "You are actually physically threatening me." "I'm not threatening you at all," I said smoothly, slowly lowering the heavy shears but keeping them totally ready. "I am actively protecting myself. There is a massive difference." Kendra came running clumsily down the green lawn, her expensive designer heels sinking deep into the soft grass that I paid to have professionally fertilized. She grabbed Andre by his shaking arm, pulling him frantically backward. "Andre, stop it right now," she cried loudly, looking directly at me with genuine absolute terror. "He has completely lost his old mind. Look at him holding that huge weapon. Let us go right now. We absolutely have to go. We can easily call the Buckhead police later. We desperately have to get to the massive venue. My wealthy parents are probably waiting there by now. We simply have to salvage this entire day." She was absolutely right. The heavy clock was actively ticking. Every single minute they foolishly wasted arguing with me in the street was a precious minute closer to their absolute social funeral. I watched them slowly retreat. They backed carefully away toward the clean sidewalk, looking at me exactly like I was a highly dangerous rabid dog. "Listen closely to me," I called out loudly, making sure my deep voice carried firmly down the quiet street. "I'm giving you exactly 24 hours. They completely stopped and looked nervously back over their shoulders. 24 hours, I repeated clearly. "Isaiah, the property manager, will physically be here tomorrow exactly at noon. He will unlock the front door for exactly 60 short minutes. You can quickly pack up your basic clothes and your daily personal items. Absolutely anything left inside after that, it goes straight to the city dump." But the expensive furniture, Kendra wailed loudly, tears ruining her perfect makeup. The massive flat-screen television, the expensive wedding gifts. "The heavy furniture is legally mine," I said firmly. "I explicitly bought it. The massive television is legally mine. I paid cold cash for it. The wedding gifts. Well, you can certainly take the expensive gifts. You are absolutely going to need them to quietly return for emergency cash when you fully realize you have nowhere to actually sleep tonight." I took one heavy step directly toward them, and they both flinched violently. "Now get completely out of here," I said coldly. "Get completely off my quiet street. Go play rich pretend with your fake wealthy in-laws. Go clearly see exactly how far that gets you today." Andre looked at me one final time. There was absolutely no love left in his terrified eyes. There was only deep, pure, unadulterated hate. And that was perfectly fine with me. I could easily live with pure hate. I absolutely could not live with constant, blatant disrespect. "Come on, Kendra," he said weakly, grabbing her soft hand. "Let us go right now. We will easily fix this massive problem. We do not need his dirty money at all." They quickly turned and ran awkwardly down the quiet street, heading straight toward the busy main road, probably blindly hoping to flag down a passing city taxi or find a spot with decent cell service to order a premium ride they absolutely could not afford. I stood there silently in the empty street, holding the heavy pruning shears, feeling the cold weight of the hardened steel in my calloused hand. I watched them completely disappear, turning the far corner of the quiet residential street. They looked exactly like two desperate rats frantically fleeing a massive sinking ship. I stood alone in the quiet street and slowly lowered the heavy pruning shears. A nosy, older neighbor, Miss Higgins, peered out cautiously from behind her expensive floral curtains directly across the wide street. I nodded respectfully at her. She quickly let the heavy fabric fall completely back. I walked slowly up the steep concrete driveway, heading straight toward the beautiful brick townhouse. I walked up the slate steps to the solid oak front door. I looked closely at the crisp legal notice that Isaiah had firmly taped right to the wood. Notice of immediate lease termination. It looked incredibly official. It looked completely final. I reached deep into my denim pocket and pulled out the brand new brass key. Isaiah had strictly instructed his professional locksmith to securely hide the only master copy directly under the heavy stone planter right on the front porch. I retrieved the cold metal and slid it smoothly into the brand new deadbolt. I did not need to wait for Isaiah to officially let me in. I legally owned the entire property. I unlocked the heavy door and stepped slowly inside. The stagnant air in the luxury house was incredibly stale. It smelled heavily of expensive designer candles, cheap spilled champagne, and absolute lazy neglect. There were expensive tailored clothes thrown carelessly absolutely everywhere. Silk dresses were pooled on the floor, exactly like dark puddles of oil. Designer shoeboxes were stacked in precarious towers, leaning heavily against the painted walls. Empty pizza boxes were stacked high on the custom glass coffee table. It looked exactly like a dirty college fraternity house, certainly not a luxury home for a married adult couple. I walked slowly through the large living room. I did not just look at the disgusting mess. I looked directly at the severe physical damage. I looked down at the expensive Brazilian cherry hardwood floors that I had meticulously installed with my own 2 hands. I remembered crawling on my aching knees for 3 solid weeks, perfectly aligning every single wooden plank. Now there were deep, ugly scratches everywhere from Kendra dragging her heavy designer luggage and blindly dragging heavy furniture across the delicate wood. I walked slowly into the custom kitchen. The deep stainless steel sink was completely overflowing with dirty, crusted plates and silverware. A highly expensive bottle of imported French champagne sat totally open on the massive kitchen counter, going completely flat and warm in the morning heat. I looked closely at the pristine granite countertops that I'd personally selected and carried heavily inside my own truck. There were dark, permanent ring marks and sticky purple wine stains soaking right into the expensive porous stone. I looked up at the custom oak cabinets. One of the heavy wooden doors was hanging violently off its expensive metal hinges, exactly like someone had drunkenly ripped it entirely open. I felt a cold, dark fury rising steadily right in my broad chest. This specific house was not just slightly messy. This was deeply, fundamentally ungrateful. Every single dark stain, every deep scratch on the wood, every single piece of rotting trash was a loud testament to exactly how little they actually cared about the back-breaking physical work I had lovingly done for them. They lived completely like wealthy squatters in a beautiful luxury palace. They treated my expensive property the exact same cruel way they treated me, with total, absolute indifference to its actual hard value. I walked slowly out of the dirty kitchen, my heavy steel toe boots crunching loudly on a shattered crystal champagne flute that was left broken right on the floor. I stepped carefully over the dangerous glass shards. This was exactly how they truly lived their private lives. This was the disgusting hidden reality right behind their fake social media photos and their high society buckhead pretension. I walked over to the modern desk sitting in the corner of the room. The wooden surface was completely buried under a massive landslide of loose paper. Unopened envelopes, glossy, expensive wedding magazines, and colorful brochures for luxury honeymoons in the Maldives. It was a pathetic shrine to their absolute financial delusion. I started aggressively digging through the massive pile. I was certainly not gentle. I swept the heavy magazines right onto the dirty floor with one single angry swipe of my thick arm. I grabbed huge handfuls of unopened mail and violently ripped them open. Past due notice from the local electric company. Final urgent warning from a major credit card company. A threatening letter from a ruthless collection agency regarding a massive defaulted personal loan. It was a complete financial autopsy. They were absolutely not just broke. They were actively drowning. They were suffocating completely right under the crushing weight of a fake luxury lifestyle they absolutely could not afford. And they were using this lavish wedding as a final desperate gasp of fresh air. They were actively gambling absolutely everything on the foolish hope that the wealthy wedding gifts would easily bail them out, or that I would just quietly die and leave them the rest of my estate. I walked slowly back into the center of the main living room, breathing heavily through my nose. I was absolutely disgusted. But then as I looked around the large room, I suddenly noticed something else entirely. Something massive that made the disgusting trash and the scratched hardwood floors seem completely insignificant. My racing heart suddenly skipped a very heavy beat. I stood completely still right in the center of the messy living room. I looked slowly up at the painted walls. When I had originally given them the keys to this expensive house, I had lovingly left a few precious things behind. Furniture mostly, but also some very specific art. My beautiful Brenda had been a deeply passionate painter. She was certainly not a famous professional, but she had an incredible way of capturing the warm, southern light that made the harsh world feel incredibly soft. She had painted stunning landscapes of the quiet places we had visited together. The tall green mountains, the deep blue lakes, the quiet hidden corners of the world where we had been incredibly happy. I looked directly at the wide spot right above the custom stone fireplace. There was a large rectangular patch of pale paint that was visibly cleaner and significantly brighter than the rest of the dirty wall. The beautiful oil painting of the old Georgia lighthouse was completely gone. I spun around quickly, my heavy boots sliding slightly on the hardwood. I looked closely at the far wall right by the dark hallway. The colorful painting of the bright spring wildflower field was entirely gone. My heavy heart began to hammer violently against my ribs. It was certainly not the frantic, fast beat of sudden panic. It was the slow, heavy, crushing thud of absolute dread. I walked rapidly down the dark hallway, kicking a large pile of dirty, expensive laundry completely out of my way. I burst violently into the large master bedroom. The massive king-size bed was completely unmade, a chaotic tangle of highly expensive imported silk sheets. Designer suitcases were sitting wide open on the floor, half-packed with expensive clothes, exactly as if they had been suddenly interrupted in a frantic rush. But I absolutely did not care about the mess anymore. I walked straight past the expensive luggage. I looked directly at the wall right above the heavy oak dresser. Brenda had painted a beautiful self-portrait exactly for my 50th birthday. It was the one specific painting where she was smiling that warm, secret, loving smile that she only ever gave to me. It was the absolute centerpiece of the room. It was completely gone. The heavy brass picture hooks were still sitting right there in the drywall, looking entirely naked and incredibly accusing. I stood completely frozen in the center of the master bedroom, spinning very slowly in a tight circle. The painted walls were completely bare. Every single precious piece of hand-painted art, every single beautiful reminder of my beloved wife was completely missing from the house. I felt a sudden cold panic grip my chest. I rushed frantically over to the large walk-in closet. I threw open the heavy wooden doors. I dropped down on my aching knees and violently pulled out the heavy bottom drawers of the custom-built jewelry cabinet. I had personally installed this secure cabinet directly into the wall to keep her precious things completely safe. The velvet-lined drawers were completely empty. Brenda's vintage pearl necklace was gone. Her diamond stud earrings were completely gone. The heavy gold watch that I had proudly given her on the exact day Andre was born was entirely gone. I sat heavily on the hard closet floor. I felt exactly like I could not breathe at all. The stale air in the messy room suddenly felt incredibly thin. They had absolutely not just lived lazily off my hard work. They had not just simply disrespected my rules. They had actively looted my entire life. They had deliberately taken the absolute only pieces of Brenda I had left in this world. They had taken the irreplaceable pieces of my heart that I had foolishly trusted them to securely safeguard, and they had permanently removed them. Why on earth would they take the sentimental paintings? They were certainly not famous works of art. They were absolutely not worth millions of dollars on the open art market. They were deeply personal family history. Unless they desperately needed emergency money incredibly fast. Unless they desperately needed untraceable cash to immediately pay for the expensive designer flowers and the luxury stretch limousine and the massive champagne tower at the exclusive high society wedding I was legally banned from. I walked back into the master bathroom. The bright vanity lights illuminated a disgusting mess of expensive makeup and empty designer perfume bottles. I looked deeply into the large mirror. I saw a very tired, very old man staring right back at me. A foolish man who had blindly trusted a venomous snake simply because he had lovingly raised it from an egg. I splashed cold tap water directly onto my face. The icy shock completely cleared my racing mind. I was absolutely not a grieving widower anymore. I was a man who had been violently robbed. I walked back into the bedroom, stepping heavily on a discarded silk tie. I looked at the empty spaces on the walls one more time. They had literally erased her. To Kendra, my beautiful wife was just a dusty old painting taking up valuable wall space. To Andre, his own loving mother was just a quick source of emergency cash. The absolute depravity of the act made my stomach turn completely over. He had willingly traded the memory of the woman who gave him life for a few hours of fake applause from wealthy people who did not even actually know his real last name. The quiet house felt exactly like an active crime scene now. Every single empty hook on the wall was a loud, screaming victim. I pushed myself up and began to frantically tear through the messy room. I aggressively ripped the expensive silk sheets completely off the large bed. I violently dumped the entire contents of the designer suitcases directly onto the hardwood floor. I systematically opened every single drawer in the heavy oak dresser. I pulled them entirely out of the wooden tracks and dumped them completely upside down. Designer socks, expensive tailored shirts, heavy imported sweaters completely buried the floor. I was systematically tearing apart the fake luxury world they had built on my tired back. I absolutely needed to know the exact truth. I needed the hard, physical proof of their ultimate betrayal. I was actively looking for absolutely anything, any small piece of paper that would clearly tell me exactly where her beautiful things were. I forcefully checked the small nightstand drawers. They were completely empty except for some loose silver change and a few crumpled paper receipts. I reached my calloused hand deep into the small woven trash can sitting right next to the bed. I pulled out a tight handful of crumpled papers. I sat heavily on the edge of the bare mattress and smoothed them out flat right on my denim jeans. A pizza delivery receipt, a dry cleaning ticket for an expensive tuxedo, a red parking ticket from downtown Atlanta. And then I suddenly saw it. A bright yellow slip of carbon paper crumpled violently into a tight ball and discarded completely, exactly as if it meant absolutely nothing. I carefully unfolded the stiff yellow paper. My thick hands were physically shaking so incredibly hard I could barely even read the faded black text. The faded ink logo right at the very top of the page was a pair of old brass scales. Downtown Atlanta Pawn and Loan. My heavy heart stopped completely. I forced my tired eyes to slowly read the itemized list printed right below the logo. It was a complete disgusting catalog of my beautiful wife's entire life. Item 1, oil painting, coastal scene, artist unknown. Item 2, oil painting, bright floral study, artist unknown. Item 3, 18 karat, solid gold locket with a small diamond chip. Item 4, vintage pearl necklace, double strand. I stared blankly at the yellow paper. The typed words swam violently right before my aging eyes. The gold locket. I had proudly bought that specific locket for my sweet Brenda the exact day we found out she was finally pregnant with Andre. I had worked brutal double shifts at the loading dock for 6 solid months just to pay cash for it. I clearly remembered the quiet night I gave it to her. We were sitting happily on the cheap carpet of our very first tiny apartment, eating hot pizza out of a cardboard box because we absolutely could not even afford a dining table yet. She had cried beautiful, happy tears. She had worn that gold locket absolutely every single day right until she got incredibly sick. She had finally taken it off in the cold hospital room because her fragile skin was just too incredibly sensitive. She had handed it weekly to me and specifically told me to give it to Andre's future wife one day. She told me to make absolutely sure she knew exactly what it truly meant. I'd proudly given that gold locket to arrogant Kendra at their expensive engagement dinner. I had quietly told her the beautiful story. I had looked her right in the eyes, and told her it was a physical symbol of enduring absolute love. And she had taken it, and she had sold it. She had taken the ultimate symbol of my dead wife's pure love for her only son, and she had traded it away for quick, dirty cash. I looked down at the final payout amount printed clearly at the bottom of the receipt. Total cash payout, $1,200. That was absolutely it. That was the exact pathetic price of my most precious memories. That was the current market value of my beautiful wife's entire legacy. They absolutely had not sold these priceless things because they were physically starving. They had certainly not sold them to quickly buy emergency medicine or even pay their late electric bill. I looked closely at the yellow receipt again. It was heavily stapled to another small piece of white paper. It was a printed invoice from a luxury Buckhead florist. Premium white orchid arrangement upgrade for the VIP head table. Total cost exactly $1,200. I let out a harsh, broken sound that was exactly half dark laugh and half agonizing sob. They had literally traded Brenda's gold locket for white orchids. They had traded her beautiful paintings for table centerpieces that would completely wilt and die before the night was even over. They had completely erased my wife just to buy a few short hours of looking incredibly rich for fake, snobby people who did not even care about them at all. I sat there alone on the edge of the unmade bed. I held the yellow pawn slip tightly in both of my shaking hands. The stiff paper felt incredibly hot right against my dark skin. For 27 long years, I had made endless foolish excuses for Andre. I constantly told myself he was just young. I told myself he was under massive pressure to succeed in a very modern corporate world. I told myself that he was really just trying to find his proper way in a harsh city that was significantly harder than the dusty freight yards I proudly grew up in. I foolishly told myself that deep down inside his tailored suits, he was still exactly the little boy who used to happily follow me around the diesel garage holding a yellow plastic wrench. But that sweet little boy was completely gone. That boy had died a very long time ago. The grown man who lived in this luxury house was a complete and total stranger. A vicious stranger who would willingly steal directly from his own mother's quiet ghost just to briefly impress a room full of arrogant strangers. I looked slowly up at the empty spot on the drywall where Brenda's beautiful, smiling portrait used to be. I could almost clearly see her warm brown eyes looking softly down at me. She had always been the gentle one. She had always told me to be incredibly patient with him. "He is just finding his own way, Marcus," she would always say gently. "Let our boy make his own small mistakes." But this was absolutely not a mistake. A simple mistake is forgetting to pay the water bill. A basic mistake is saying the wrong angry thing in a heated argument. This was a deliberate, calculated, vicious choice. It was a choice to clearly value a fake public image entirely over a loving person. To value a lavish party entirely over a loyal parent. This was an absolute violation. I finally felt the last thick tether completely snap the invisible heavy cord that connects a proud father directly to his son. That thick, braided rope of unconditional love and duty, it severely frayed and then it violently broke into a million pieces. I was absolutely not a father anymore. Not in this messy room. Not with this yellow receipt burning in my hand. I was a dangerous man who had been completely robbed. I folded the yellow receipt incredibly carefully. I creased the sharp edges with my thick thumb until they were perfectly flat. I placed it securely right into the breast pocket of my faded flannel shirt, right over my beating heart. It absolutely did not feel like a piece of paper anymore. It felt exactly like a loaded weapon. It felt like solid, undeniable evidence. I stood up slowly from the bed. My bad knees did not pop this time. I felt incredibly strong. I felt completely dangerously cold. The heavy sadness was completely gone. The deep grief was entirely gone. Absolutely all that was left was a sharp, focused clarity, so incredibly sharp it could easily cut through solid steel. I walked out of the master bedroom, leaving the disgusting mess completely behind me. I walked slowly down the dark hallway, past the empty accusing spaces on the drywall. I did not look at them again. I absolutely did not need to. I had the crisp, yellow receipt sitting heavy and hot in my front pocket. I walked right out the solid oak front door and locked the brand new deadbolt. The loud, sharp click of the heavy lock was the exact sound of a steel prison door closing permanently. I walked slowly down the slate driveway, heading straight to my old Ford truck. The bright Atlanta sun was fully up now, glaring harshly off the dented metal hood. It was a perfectly beautiful Saturday, a gorgeous day for a high society wedding, and it was a completely beautiful day for absolute cold justice. I climbed up into the hot cab of my heavy truck. I reached into my faded denim pocket for my cell phone. My thick hand was perfectly steady. I scrolled down my short contact list to Isaiah's private number. I was certainly not calling him just to complain like an old fool. I was not calling him to cry about my broken heart. I was calling my corporate lawyer to formally declare absolute war. The long years of quietly teaching gentle lessons were completely over. The harsh time for severe legal punishment had officially begun. I pressed the green call button. Isaiah answered on the very first ring. "Marcus, my friend, did you get inside the townhouse?" he asked smoothly. I looked at the beautiful brick house one last time. I got inside, Isaiah, and I found exactly what I desperately needed to see, I said quietly. "What exactly did you find, Marcus?" Isaiah asked, his deep voice thick with genuine concern. "I found the exact price tag, Isaiah," I said coldly. "I found out exactly how little I am truly worth to my own son, and I found out exactly how much my beautiful Brenda was worth to him." There was a very heavy, stunned pause on the secure line. "Marcus, you sound incredibly different today," Isaiah said cautiously. "I'm completely different, Isaiah," I said. "The foolish old Marcus who constantly paid the heavy bills is entirely gone. The soft father who always looked the other way is officially dead." "What exactly are you going to do, Marcus?" he asked nervously. "I'm going to that lavish wedding, Isaiah," I said. "But I'm absolutely not going as a proud guest, and I'm certainly not going as a loving father." "Then what exactly are you going as?" Isaiah asked. I started the heavy truck engine. The loud motor roared a deep, angry sound that perfectly matched the violent vibration in my broad chest. "I'm going as the ruthless repo man, Isaiah, and I am coming to legally collect absolutely everything." I pulled my heavy truck away from the quiet curb, steering onto the busy main boulevard. The tall Atlanta skyline rose up proudly ahead of me, a jagged, shiny line of modern steel and glass right against the bright blue sky. Somewhere inside one of those massive towers was the expensive corporate law office of Isaiah and Associates. Isaiah listened to the roaring engine over the phone. "Please tell me you did not do anything physically rash, Marcus. he pleaded softly. Please tell me you just went inside, looked around the messy house, and left peacefully. I merged smoothly into the fast center lane, my dark eyes fixed entirely on the busy road. I absolutely did not do anything rash, Isaiah. I said, my deep voice steady and completely cold. I did something entirely necessary. I have the hard physical evidence. I have the actual carbon receipt. It is sitting safely in my front pocket right this exact second. What kind of paper receipt? Marcus Isaiah asked. A pawn shop ticket, I said firmly. Downtown Atlanta, pawn and loan. They completely stripped the house, Isaiah. They took Brenda's beautiful paintings off the drywall. They took her vintage pearls. They took the heavy gold watch that I proudly gave her when Andre was born. They cleared it completely out. It was absolutely not a desperate robbery. It was a cold, calculated liquidation. I heard Isaiah inhale sharply over the phone. Oh, sweet Lord, Isaiah whispered. Marcus, I'm so incredibly sorry. Do not be sorry for me, I snapped loudly. Be my ruthless lawyer. I want you to open a brand new criminal file right this exact second. I want you to officially draft a severe criminal complaint. Grand larceny and felony theft of private property, well over $5,000. I want the legal paperwork ready to be formally filed with the city court by Monday morning. Marcus, please slow down, Isaiah warned carefully. This is your only son. Once you formally file felony criminal charges, there is absolutely no going back. The aggressive district attorney will quickly pick it up. He could easily do real hard time in a state prison. I tightened my strong grip on the steering wheel until my thick knuckles turned completely white. He willingly sold his own dead mother for $1,200, I said coldly. He made his vicious choice entirely on his own. Now I am making mine. Write the formal legal complaint, Isaiah. I did not wait for him to argue with me again. I pushed completely forward, and Isaiah, there is one more very important thing. You have my private trust documents sitting right in front of you. I do have them here, he said quietly. Go directly to page 14, section 3, the formal asset recovery clause I commanded. I heard the crisp sound of heavy paper pages turning. I knew that specific legal document entirely by heart. I'd quietly written it myself 5 long years ago, when I first started to seriously worry that Andre did not understand the true value of a hard-earned dollar. It was a hidden fail-safe, a massive nuclear button that I honestly never thought I would actually have to push. I see it right here, Isaiah said, his professional voice dropping to a shocked whisper. Marcus, that specific clause allows you to legally claw back absolutely any physical assets purchased with private trust funds if the named beneficiary engages in felony criminal activity or gross financial misconduct. Activate it right now, I said. Marcus. Isaiah said slowly, that means absolutely everything he touches. The car down, payments, the expensive furniture, the tailored clothes right on his back. If we can legally prove it was bought with the corporate allowance money, you can legally seize it all today. I know exactly what it means, I said loudly. Activate the clause immediately. I want to lean incredibly hard on absolutely everything he has. I want his bank accounts totally frozen. I want his physical assets legally seized. I want him to wake up tomorrow morning and own absolutely nothing but the deep, bitter regret in his dark heart. I will get my entire legal team on it, Isaiah said. His deep voice was completely resigned now. He knew significantly better than to argue with me when I used that specific tone. It was the exact tone I used when a lazy subcontractor tried to cut dangerous corners on a massive concrete foundation. It was the heavy tone of a serious man who was absolutely about to tear the entire building completely down. Call the Atlanta police right now, Isaiah, I said. Tell them you are formally representing Marcus Vance. Tell them a major felony theft has occurred and tell them to dispatch 2 uniformed officers directly to the Grand Estate venue. I will meet them right there. I hung up the phone, completely severing the connection. I stared straight ahead at the busy highway. The massive dominoes were finally falling, and I was going to proudly watch every single one of them crash. I was driving straight down the busy Atlanta highway, heading directly for the luxury Grand Estate venue. But then I looked slowly down at my faded flannel shirt and my dirty steel toe boots. If I was absolutely going to legally dismantle a fake high society wedding, I needed to properly wear my dry clean charcoal suit. I needed to look exactly like the wealthy corporate man who legally owned the entire massive building. I took the very next steep exit and circled my heavy truck right back towards South Fulton. It would only take 20 short minutes to quickly change my clothes and grab my heavy leather briefcase. That specific leather briefcase held the original printed property deeds and the corporate trust documents. It was the absolute ultimate weapon. I pulled my dented Ford truck right back into my own quiet driveway. I walked inside my empty house and walked straight down the long, dark hallway. I pulled my expensive charcoal suit completely out from the very back of the deep closet. I put on a crisp white shirt and tied a perfect silk knot. I slipped my calloused feet into the heavy black dress boots I had polished so carefully last night at the kitchen table. I looked directly into the tall glass mirror. I absolutely did not look like a tired, retired logistics contractor anymore. I looked exactly like the ruthless chairman of the board, preparing for a hostile corporate takeover. I walked slowly into my quiet home office to grab my heavy briefcase. As I was securely packing the printed legal documents, my cell phone buzzed softly in my pocket. It was a quick text message from Terrence, the strict general manager of the Grand Estate. Mr. Vance, Terrence wrote, "The groom's credit cards are completely declining. I have officially locked the grand ballroom doors. The elite guests are waiting in the front lobby. The groom has abruptly left the property in a city taxi, claiming he is fetching emergency family funds. End of message." I smiled a very cold, dark smile. The heavy trap was actively snapping completely shut. Andre was incredibly desperate for emergency cash, and he had completely run out of easy options. He was severely cornered right before the massive venue permanently kicked them all out into the busy street. He had cowardly left arrogant Kendra right at the venue to face her angry, wealthy parents entirely alone, and he had frantically rushed all the way back to my quiet house. Suddenly, I heard the violent screech of cheap tires out in the quiet residential street. I looked directly out the large front window of my office. It was a bright yellow Atlanta City taxicab skidding aggressively to a halt right in front of my green lawn. The heavy back door flew violently open. Andre stumbled awkwardly out onto the hard concrete. He was physically sweating completely through his expensive tailored tuxedo shirt. His formal black bow tie was hanging totally loose around his thick neck. He looked exactly like a desperate cornered rat fleeing a burning ship. He quickly reached into his expensive tuxedo pocket and pulled out his shiny platinum credit card, handing it frantically to the angry taxi driver. The driver swiped the card on his small digital machine. I watched through this clear glass window as the driver violently shook his head and yelled something loudly out the open window. The stolen card was completely dead. Andre panicked, looking wildly around the empty street. He quickly pulled off his expensive designer watch, the one I had proudly bought him for his college graduation, and shoved it right through the taxi window. The driver looked at the heavy silver watch, snatched it aggressively, and sped quickly away, leaving my son completely stranded in my driveway. Andre was actively plotting something incredibly dark. He did not know that I already knew absolutely everything about the pawn shop receipt sitting hot in my front suit pocket. He honestly thought I was just a stubborn, angry old man who was temporarily throwing a bitter temper tantrum over a rude text message. He deeply believed he could still easily manipulate my soft, fatherly heart. He had rushed here to execute a vicious backup plan, a desperate crime to steal emergency funds, just to briefly save his fake social face. I stood quietly in the dark shadows of my home office, watching my only son through the clear glass. He did not arrogantly march up the steep driveway the violent way he had this early morning. He walked incredibly slowly, looking nervously back over his shoulder, exactly like a common criminal checking for the neighborhood police. I watched him slowly approach my solid front door. He raised his shaking fist and knocked incredibly softly on the heavy wood. It was absolutely not the loud, demanding, aggressive pounding from this morning. It was a slow, pathetic, weak tapping. He was actively preparing to perform a dramatic fake show. He was going to desperately play the innocent, helpless victim begging his rich daddy for one last massive favor. I slowly placed my heavy leather briefcase right down on the office floor. If my desperate son wanted to act in a fake, tragic play, I was absolutely willing to take the center stage with him. I was going to actively play the gullible, senile, forgiving old father. I was going to let him step blindly right into a massive, inescapable legal trap. I walked slowly out of the dark office and stepped quietly into the front hallway. I took a very deep, slow breath, calming my racing heart. I forced my cold, hard facial expression to completely soften. I let my broad shoulders slump heavily forward, exactly like a tired, broken old man who desperately missed his only son. I reached out my calloused hand and slowly turned the brass doorknob. I slowly pulled the heavy oak door completely open. The bright afternoon sun hit my tired face. Andre was standing right there on my front porch. He looked absolutely, completely pathetic. His highly expensive tailored tuxedo was a totally wrinkled mess. His silk bow tie was hanging completely undone, exactly like a cheap broken noose around his thick neck. His soft face was completely red and his eyes were deeply swollen from crying. Real desperate tears of sheer panic. "Dad," he sobbed incredibly loudly, falling heavily onto his shaking knees right on the hard concrete porch. "Please, Dad, I'm so incredibly sorry." I looked slowly down at him. A fully grown man of 27 kneeling violently in the actual dirt, wearing a ruined designer suit. It was a completely disgusting physical display of absolute weakness, but I forced my aging face to look deeply, genuinely concerned. I let my broad shoulders slump exactly like a defeated old man. "Stand up, Andre," I said softly. I kept my deep, booming voice incredibly quiet, and I made sure it trembled just a little bit, exactly like a heartbroken father. "What on earth is going on, son?" He scrambled awkwardly right back to his feet. He reached out frantically and grabbed my rough, calloused hands with his soft, completely sweaty palms. "It is an absolute living nightmare, Dad," he cried loudly. Massive tears streaming rapidly down his red cheeks. The massive venue completely locked the grand ballroom doors. Terrence, the angry general manager, is actively threatening to call the Atlanta police for felony theft of luxury services. They are absolutely going to publicly arrest me, Dad. They are going to put me in a state prison. I slowly pulled my rough hands away, acting exactly like a deeply hurt, highly confused old man. "But why exactly are you here, Andre?" I asked quietly, looking softly at the ground. "You specifically sent me that terrible text message last night. You explicitly told me I was entirely too working class to ever be seen at your elite high society wedding. You clearly said I was an absolute embarrassment to you." Andre violently shook his head back and forth exactly like a terrified child. "No, Dad," he pleaded desperately, his cracking voice echoing off the brick walls. "It was absolutely never me. It was all Kendra. She literally forced me to type those awful, cruel words. She stood aggressively right over me in the luxury hotel room, screaming violently that her wealthy buckhead parents would cut us off completely if you proudly showed up in your old flannel shirt. She physically threatened to cancel the entire wedding if I did not ban you." I stood completely silent on the porch, listening closely to his smooth, highly practiced lies. He was violently throwing his beautiful young bride completely under the massive, moving bus without a single ounce of human hesitation. He was actively blaming her for every single dark choice he had willingly made. He was exactly the cowardly, selfish parasite I truly knew he was. I reached my thick right hand into my charcoal suit pocket, and my thick finger brushed gently against the folded yellow pawn shop receipt. I knew exactly what he and Kendra did together. I knew exactly who stole Brenda's gold locket. But I kept the sad, gullible father mask perfectly secure on my face. "She violently forced you to do it?" I asked weakly, making my tired brown eyes look incredibly wide and highly vulnerable. "Yes, Dad." He lied incredibly smoothly, sniffing loudly and wiping his wet running nose directly on his expensive silk sleeve. "She is an absolute manipulative monster. Her entire fake high society family is completely toxic and entirely broke. I clearly see the ugly dark truth now, Dad. I clearly see exactly what she truly is. But I'm physically, legally trapped right now." He took a desperate, shaking step much closer to me, rudely invading my quiet, personal space. "The elite wealthy guests are already sitting completely angry in the grand lobby," he continued frantically. "Her arrogant father Desmond is violently screaming at the venue security staff. If I absolutely do not walk right back in those double doors with the emergency cleared funds, they will legally press massive felony charges against me." He paused for a dramatic second, looking deeply into my tired eyes, actively searching for any soft sign of fatherly weakness. "I just urgently need a short-term personal loan, Dad," he finally begged, his panicked voice dropping down to a frantic, heavy whisper. "Just enough emergency cash to completely clear the heavy venue balance today. I absolutely swear to you on my actual physical life, I will formally, legally annul the fake marriage tomorrow morning. I will walk completely away from her toxic family. I will happily move right back home to South Fulton. I will wake up early and work in the dirty diesel garage with you. Just please, Dad, please save me from going to a violent state prison today. Move back home. Work hard in the dirty diesel garage." It was the exact, beautiful fatherly fantasy he knew I had secretly harbored for many long years. He was actively, viciously using my deepest, most private fatherly dreams as a cheap, blunt weapon to legally steal my hard-earned working money. It was incredibly brilliant and completely, absolutely evil. He was an incredible actor. If I did not have the physical carbon receipt burning in my pocket, I honestly might have completely believed his fake, desperate tears. I looked slowly down at the hard, concrete porch, exactly like a deeply conflicted, highly emotional old man, completely torn between deep anger and pure fatherly love. I let a very long, heavy silence stretch out between us, making him actively sweat in the hot Georgia sun. I let a very long, heavy silence stretch out between us, making him actively sweat in the hot Georgia sun. I slowly looked up from the hard concrete right into his red, swollen eyes. I let my broad shoulders slump even further forward. I let out a long, heavy, rattling sigh, exactly like a deeply tired old man who just wanted his broken family put back together. "Are you absolutely telling me the honest truth, Andre?" I asked softly, letting my deep voice crack right in the middle of the sentence. "Are you truly willing to walk completely away from that fake luxury lifestyle and come back home to me?" "Yes, Dad," he cried loudly, nodding his head so fast it looked completely ridiculous. "I swear on my actual life, I just desperately need to clear this massive debt right now. I just need to pay Terrence at the Grand Estate so the Atlanta police do not physically arrest me. I will legally annul the fake marriage tomorrow morning. I will come straight back to South Fulton. I promise you, Dad." I looked at him closely, exactly like a desperate father clinging blindly to a foolish hope. I knew exactly what he was actively doing. I knew perfectly well that the very second I handed him a signed check, he would rush straight back to Buckhead and laugh at the stupid old man with Kendra. I had the crisp yellow pawn shop receipt resting heavily against my beating heart. I knew he was a vicious, calculated thief, but I absolutely needed him to firmly believe that he was actively winning this sick game. I needed him to blindly walk right into the massive legal trap I had carefully set for him. I slowly reached out my calloused hand and placed it gently on his shaking shoulder. He completely froze under my heavy touch. "Okay, son," I whispered softly, making sure a single fake tear welled up in my aging eye. "Okay. I will absolutely help you pay the angry venue manager. I cannot stand the terrible thought of my only boy sitting in a cold, dark state prison." "Oh, thank God," he gasped loudly, his entire body going completely limp with massive relief. "Thank you, Dad. You are literally saving my entire life." I slowly stepped back and opened the heavy oak door completely wide. "Come inside the quiet house, Andre," I said gently. "It is incredibly hot out here on the front porch. Let me go find my old leather checkbook. I think I left it sitting in the back kitchen." He stepped quickly over the threshold, walking right into the cool air conditioning of my quiet hallway. He was physically vibrating with pure, unadulterated adrenaline and sick, twisted victory. He honestly thought he had played me perfectly. He truly believed his fake dramatic tears had completely melted my cold, angry heart. He looked around the familiar house exactly like a conquering king stepping proudly back into his rightful castle. "Just wait right here in the front living room," I said, slowly shuffling my heavy black dress boots against the hardwood floor, actively playing the part of a slow, senile old man. "I'm going to walk back to the kitchen and search through my messy drawers. My old memory is just not what it used to be. It might take me a few long minutes to find the right banking ledger." "Take your time, Dad," he said smoothly, his frantic, panicked voice completely gone now, rapidly replaced by that arrogant, entitled buckhead tone. "I'm just incredibly grateful you are finally listening to reason." I turned my back to him and started shuffling slowly down the long, dark hallway. I made absolutely sure to drag my left foot slightly exactly like my bad knee was acting up again. I let out another loud, heavy groan, just to completely sell the pathetic physical performance. But the very second I turned the sharp corner and stepped completely out of his direct line of sight, my entire physical posture completely changed. I instantly stopped shuffling my feet. I stood perfectly straight up. My broad shoulders snapped back and the fake tired look completely vanished from my cold face. I walked completely silently on the balls of my feet, heading straight for the bright kitchen. I did not actually need to search for my leather checkbook at all. I knew exactly where everything was. But I specifically needed to give him enough unsupervised time alone in the front of the house. I specifically needed him to look directly over at my quiet home office. I had deliberately left the heavy office door wide open. I had purposefully left my heavy leather briefcase sitting right on the expensive rug. And I had specifically left a stack of crisp, blank corporate checks sitting completely exposed right on the corner of the heavy oak desk. I walked into the quiet kitchen and leaned silently against the cold granite counter. I looked closely at the digital clock on the microwave. I was going to give him exactly 5 short minutes. 5 minutes alone with his dark, greedy thoughts. 5 minutes for his vicious, entitled nature to completely take over his basic common sense. I knew exactly what he was doing in there. A desperate broke man who would willingly sell his dead mother's gold locket to a shady downtown pawn shop would never just sit quietly on a comfortable sofa waiting patiently for a small handout. A true parasite always completely drains the host when nobody is actively watching. I stood perfectly still in the quiet kitchen, listening incredibly closely to the absolute silence of the large house. Then I clearly heard it. It was incredibly faint, but my old ears were completely sharp. It was the soft, unmistakable sound of expensive leather loafers creeping slowly across the hardwood floor, heading straight toward my open office door. The massive steel trap was actively snapping completely shut. I slowly crossed my thick arms over my broad chest. I thought about the specific checking account those blank corporate checks were securely linked to. It was an incredibly old, dead commercial account that I had formally closed down over 3 long years ago. But more importantly, I had specifically instructed Isaiah to flag that exact routing number with the federal fraud authorities. Any unauthorized person attempting to legally cash or deposit one of those dead checks for a massive sum of money would instantly trigger an automatic silent felony alarm. I had completely baited the heavy steel hook. All I had to do now was quietly wait in the dark shadows of my kitchen and let the greedy fish bite down as hard as he possibly could. He was actively destroying his own life, and I was simply providing him the quiet, unsupervised room to completely finish the dark job. I took a slow, deep breath and prepared myself for the final brutal act of this absolute tragedy. I stood perfectly still in my quiet kitchen. I listened incredibly closely to the faint sounds echoing right down the long hallway. My heart was completely cold, beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. I could clearly hear the rapid rustle of stiff paper coming directly from my open home office. Andre was absolutely not sitting patiently on the living room sofa, waiting for his loving father to kindly help him. He was actively hunting for a massive illegal score. I walked silently on the balls of my feet, right to the edge of the kitchen doorway. I peered very carefully around the wooden frame, looking straight down the dark hall. The bright morning sunlight shining directly through the office window cast a long, dark shadow right across the polished hardwood floor. It was the frantic, rapidly shifting shadow of a desperate, cornered thief. I watched the dark silhouette of my only son bending violently over my heavy oak desk. He was moving incredibly fast, his soft hands tearing aggressively through my neat stacks of corporate paper. I could clearly hear the sharp grinding sound of the heavy wooden drawers being violently pulled completely open and shoved aggressively shut. He was actively looking for absolutely anything that he could easily turn into fast, untraceable cash. He was completely out of time, and he knew perfectly well that the angry venue manager was actively waiting to call the Atlanta police. I had specifically left my heavy leather briefcase sitting right on the expensive Persian rug directly in plain sight. I saw his dark shadow drop quickly to the floor. He was frantically pulling at the thick leather straps. I heard the loud, sharp snap of the brass locks popping completely open. He was digging aggressively right through my private corporate files, completely violating my sacred trust. He was an absolute complete fool. He honestly thought he had entirely outsmarted his tired, senile old father. He truly believed he was a brilliant criminal mastermind executing a flawless heist right in the middle of a beautiful Saturday morning, but he was actively playing cheap checkers on a massive, highly complicated chessboard that I completely owned. I watched him stand quickly back up. His dark shadow stretched long and distorted across the hallway wall. He had found exactly what I specifically left for him. A thick, crisp wood of blank corporate checks linked directly to a completely dead, heavily monitored fraud account. I had deliberately placed them right on the very corner of the desk, exactly where a frantic, greedy man would easily snatch them. But his dark, endless greed did not stop there at all. I watched his shadow reach completely across the wide desk. I'd also deliberately left a thick, heavy manila folder sitting completely exposed in the bright sunlight. It was prominently labeled in very large black letters, South Fulton Property Deeds. It contained high-quality, incredibly realistic photocopies of the actual legal deeds to my various commercial warehouses. They were absolutely worthless copies, explicitly marked as non-binding drafts on the very back pages. But to a panicked, heavily sweating man wearing a ruined, tailored tuxedo, they looked exactly like an absolute goldmine. I clearly heard the sharp, crisp sound of heavy paper being shoved aggressively into a tight fabric pocket. He was deliberately taking the blank corporate checks. He was actively taking the fake property deeds. He was planning to commit massive, undeniable felony forgery. He was going clearly beyond simple petty theft now. He was actively stepping directly into the dark, dangerous realm of high-level corporate fraud. I knew exactly what his sick, twisted plan was. He was going to blindly forge my personal signature on those dead corporate checks to quickly pay off Terrence at the Grand Estate venue. And he was going to illegally use those fake property deeds to quietly secure a massive, predatory cash loan from a shady downtown lender just to keep his fake buckhead lifestyle completely afloat. He was actively digging his own deep grave with a shiny golden shovel, and he was doing it all completely willingly right inside the safe home of the man who gave him actual life. The absolute disrespect was truly staggering, but it completely hardened my cold resolve. I did not feel a single drop of fatherly pity anymore. I only felt the cold, hard weight of absolute justice settling deeply into my broad chest. I needed to end this sick charade right now. I needed to let him firmly think he had successfully escaped with the stolen loot. I took a slow, deep breath and prepared to step right back into the pathetic, gullible father role. I turned my back completely to the hallway and faced the quiet kitchen counter. I opened a heavy wooden drawer and slammed it loudly shut. I made absolutely sure the sharp noise echoed clearly down the hall. I started shuffling my heavy black dress boots loudly against the floor, exactly like a confused old man finally giving up a frustrating search. "Andre," I called out softly, making my deep voice waver just a little bit. "Andre, my boy, where exactly did you put my old reading glasses? I simply cannot find that leather checkbook anywhere in this messy kitchen." I heard a sudden violent gasp from the home office. It was the terrified sound of a cornered rat suddenly realizing the bright lights were coming right back on. I heard the frantic, heavy thud of his expensive leather loafers scrambling desperately across the expensive rug. He was actively sprinting back to the front living room, desperately trying to beat me to the comfortable sofa. I smiled a very cold, very dark smile. The heavy bait was completely taken. The massive steel hook was set deeply in his jaw. Now it was officially time to reel the massive catch completely in. I picked up a random useless piece of junk mail from the kitchen counter and started walking slowly back down the long hallway, ready to perform the greatest acting role of my entire life. I shuffled slowly right into the bright living room, holding the useless piece of junk mail firmly in my hand. Andre was sitting incredibly stiffly right on the edge of the expensive leather sofa. His tailored tuxedo jacket was bulging noticeably right at the breast pocket. He was breathing incredibly fast, taking shallow, desperate gasps of air. The heavy sweat was pouring freely down his forehead, completely ruining his expensive grooming. He looked absolutely nothing like a confident groom. He looked exactly like a cornered thief who had just robbed a local bank and was waiting frantically for the getaway car. "Did you happen to see my reading glasses anywhere, son?" I asked softly, letting my deep voice crack right in the middle of the sentence. I looked blindly around the clean room, exactly like a confused old man. "I simply cannot find that leather checkbook anywhere in the back kitchen. I'm so incredibly sorry, Andre. It seems my old mind is just completely failing me today." Andre jumped violently up from the leather sofa, exactly as if he had been physically burned. "It is perfectly fine, Dad," he said rapidly, his high-pitched voice vibrating with sick, nervous energy. "Do not even worry about the checkbook anymore. I just quickly checked my cell phone. Kendra just texted me from the massive venue. Her wealthy father, Desmond, is actively wiring some emergency funds to the general manager right now. I absolutely have to get right back to Buckhead to formally sign the venue paperwork." He was an absolutely terrible liar. His dark eyes darted wildly around the quiet room, completely refusing to make any direct eye contact with me. His soft right hand kept reaching nervously up, tapping gently against the heavy bulge in his tuxedo pocket, instinctively protecting his stolen loot. He was physically vibrating with pure, unadulterated adrenaline, desperate to completely escape my quiet house before I magically realized what he had actually done. "But I thought you desperately needed my personal help, Andre," I said weakly, taking one slow, shuffling step directly toward him. I thought you specifically said they were going to call the Atlanta police on you. I absolutely do not want my only son going to a violent state prison. I have it completely under control now, Dad, he insisted loudly, aggressively stepping backward toward the solid front door. Thank you so much for willingly trying to help me. I really do appreciate it. I promise you, Dad, will legally annul the fake marriage tomorrow morning, exactly like we just discussed. I will come straight back to South Fulton. I absolutely love you, Dad. He did not wait for my slow, fatherly response. He violently yanked the heavy oak door completely open and practically sprinted right out onto the front porch. I watched him frantically tap the bright screen of his cell phone, aggressively ordering an expensive premium ride that he absolutely could not afford. He paced wildly back and forth on the hard concrete, constantly looking down the quiet street exactly like a terrified fugitive. Less than 5 short minutes later, a sleek black car pulled aggressively up to the quiet curb. Andre threw open the back door, dove frantically inside, and the luxury car sped completely away, completely disappearing around the far corner. I stood completely alone right in the silent hallway of my quiet house. I slowly dropped the useless piece of junk mail directly onto the hardwood floor. I instantly stopped slumping my broad shoulders. I stood perfectly tall, proudly stretching my aching back. The pathetic, tired, gullible father mask completely melted away from my cold face, rapidly replaced by the hardened, ruthless logistics boss. I smiled a very dark, incredibly cold smile. The heavy steel trap was now completely perfectly set. My vicious, entitled son was actively carrying a thick pad of blank corporate checks linked directly to a closed, heavily monitored commercial account. He was also actively carrying fake property deeds to massive commercial warehouses he did not actually own. I knew exactly what he was frantically rushing to do. He was going to blindly forge my personal signature and confidently hand one of those dead checks directly to Terrence at the Grand Estate to rapidly clear the massive $85,000 balance. What my arrogant son absolutely did not know was that the very second Terrence attempted to digitally verify that specific routing number, it would not simply decline the large transaction. It would instantly trigger a massive, silent federal fraud alert. It would send an immediate, high-priority digital notification directly to my corporate lawyer, Isaiah, and straight to the federal banking authorities in downtown Atlanta. By willingly stealing those specific corporate documents and actively planning to blindly forge my legal signature, Andre had officially crossed a massive, incredibly dangerous line. He had completely elevated his dark actions from simple, petty theft of his dead mother's jewelry completely up to major, undeniable corporate felony fraud. He had willingly handed me the absolute perfect legal weapon to completely destroy his fake luxury life entirely in front of his arrogant high society guests. I walked smoothly back into my quiet home office. I picked up my heavy leather briefcase, the one containing the actual legally binding trust documents and the original property deeds. I snapped the brass locks securely shut. I walked over to the tall wall mirror and carefully straightened my silk tie. I smoothed the lapels of my expensive charcoal suit. I looked exactly like the wealthy corporate owner of a massive commercial empire. It was officially time for me to finally leave South Fulton. It was time to confidently drive my dented Ford truck straight up to the wealthiest zip code in the entire city. My ungrateful son desperately wanted a spectacular, unforgettable high society wedding. He wanted a lavish, expensive show to proudly impress fake people who did not even truly care about him, while the shadowy corporate landlord was absolutely coming to the massive party, and I was bringing a devastating legal reckoning right along with me. The sleek black car sped dangerously up the busy Atlanta highway, carrying my desperate son directly back to Buckhead. Andre sat completely rigid in the soft leather seat, sweating profusely through his ruined, tailored tuxedo. He reached frantically into his breast pocket and pulled out the stolen pad of corporate checks. He stared greedily at the crisp paper, seeing exactly what he foolishly thought was his ultimate salvation. He pulled a heavy gold pen straight from his inner jacket pocket. His soft hands were physically shaking so incredibly hard he could barely hold the metal barrel steady. He flipped over a crumpled dry cleaning receipt and practiced my personal signature 3 different times. He carefully copied the sharp, aggressive loops and the heavy forward slant of Marcus Vance. He was actively, willingly committing felony forgery right in the back of a moving luxury car. The premium ride pulled aggressively up to the massive front entrance of the grand estate. The uniformed valet rushed forward, but Andre did not even wait for the heavy door to open. He shoved the driver completely away and sprinted frantically up the wide marble steps. He burst violently through the heavy double doors, running straight into the grand lobby. The luxury lobby was an absolute chaotic disaster. Kendra was standing completely frozen right beneath the massive crystal chandelier, crying heavily, her expensive designer makeup running completely down her pale face. Her arrogant father, Desmond, was shouting violently at 2 large, heavily armed security guards. The elite high society guests were whispering loudly, pointing their manicured fingers directly at the pathetic scene. They were actively watching the fake luxury facade completely crumble to the expensive floor. Andre completely ignored absolutely everyone. He ran straight past his weeping bride, heading directly for the formal management office, located right behind the front reception desk. He threw the heavy oak door completely open without even bothering to politely knock. Terrence, the strict general manager, was standing right behind his massive mahogany desk. Terrence was a tall, incredibly sharp man, wearing a flawless, tailored suit. He looked absolutely furious, his jaw clenched incredibly tight. "Where exactly have you been, Andre?" Terrence demanded loudly, his deep voice echoing sharply in the small private office. "You have exactly 2 short minutes to physically produce $85,000 in cleared funds, or I am formally calling the Atlanta police to have you and your entire fake family publicly arrested for massive theft of luxury services. Please calm down." Terrence. Andre panted heavily, leaning his sweaty hands directly on the polished mahogany desk. "I just rushed completely across town to properly secure the emergency family funds. My wealthy father formally authorized a direct corporate payment strictly from his private business account." Andre pulled the stolen checkbook right out of his tuxedo pocket. He slapped the crisp paper directly onto the hard desk, completely ignoring the fact that his hands were still violently shaking. He clicked his heavy gold pen. He did not hesitate for a single second. He rapidly filled out the payee line, writing the grand estate in thick, shaky ink. He carefully wrote out the massive amount, $85,000. And then, standing right under the bright security cameras mounted clearly in the corner of the ceiling, he deliberately forged my legal signature. He ripped the fraudulent check completely off the paper pad and shoved it aggressively toward Terrence. "Here's your damn money, Terrence," Andre snapped arrogantly, his fake buckhead confidence suddenly returning in a massive rush. "The funds are completely guaranteed. Now go immediately unlock the grand ballroom doors and tell your aggressive security guards to back completely off my wealthy guests. We have an expensive wedding to officially celebrate." Terrence looked slowly down directly at the forged corporate check. He looked closely at the business name printed clearly at the top right corner. Vance, Logistics, and Freight. Then he looked deliberately up, pointing his eyes directly at the small, blinking red light of the high-definition security camera, recording absolutely every single second of this severe felony transaction. "You are formally submitting this specific corporate check as full legal payment for today," Terrence asked coldly, making absolutely sure the sensitive audio recording captured the exact undeniable confirmation. "Yes, I absolutely am," Andre stated proudly, adjusting his loose silk bow tie, exactly like a victorious king reclaiming his throne.